Buddhism says we must start our life with a right view. Leading a moral life needs us to make effort, and in making effort must be guided by right view, right understanding. So this itself is a rational thinking in Buddhism. This rational thinking is implied throughout all Buddhist studies. Buddhism uses another term called Yoniso Manasikara. In fact, that concept I usually termed as a Buddhist concept of critical thinking. Buddhism, through all its practices and teaching, emphasizing on rational thinking. That is very important. So this rational thinking must be based on right view and also contributing to form a better view. Although right understanding is very important, right view is that very important, but we should never dogmatically adhere to any kind of a view, even right view. That means we should have right view, but we should not dogmatically attach to our right view even. Therefore, that is a very important idea because today, within the family, within the community, within the nation, they argue each other. Why? Because each one thinking that they have the right view. They usually say, I'm right, my understanding is good, and your understanding is wrong. And because sticking to this, they fight each other. That's why Buddhism says, even if your right view is right, even if your view is good, you should, still open up, and you should still listening to others' criticisms and listening to others to advice, so that you can grow, you can develop, because the entire society is developing. The entire society is always moving on, never stop. Since it's moving on, if you stop there, stick to your own view, you will left behind after a few years. That's why Buddhism says, even if you have right view, you still remain open and continuously learn others, even criticisms about yourself. Otherwise, you will never develop. That's why Buddhism always criticizes this is a bad idea, saying that this alone is the truth, all else is false. That is a very bad idea, because if you uphold that idea, that means you will never listen to any others, even right view, or you want listening to their criticism, you will naturally come up and to fight. That's why today in this world, so many fightings. Each one holding their own views. That's why Buddhism totally rejects this idea. Even if you are right, you should be open up. That's why Buddhism coming back to its own Dhamma. Let me see. Buddhism coming to the Dhamma. Even the Dhamma, the Buddhist teaching, Buddhism says it's empty. Why is it empty? Empty means you shall not attach to it. If you attach to it dogmatically, it's also wrong. That's why Buddhism says Dhamma is empty. When you think about it, no any other world religions saying their doctrine is empty. None of anybody. It's only Buddhism, dare to say this, our doctrine is empty. After you attain happiness, give it up. No any other religions. And because Buddhism clearly says that view is only serving as a guide for our life, leading to happiness. That is the purpose. In Chinese, they had a 指月录. That is one of the masterpieces of Chan meditation books. And that precisely saying that view is only a guide. And you shall never stick to that. And even a right view. Therefore, view is conceptual, and this view serves as a purpose, and the Dhamma is also a view, and when this view we adopt, lead us to happiness. That's why one of the Korea Buddhist monk is Chan master. He got enlightened, and he lived in Haiyan-si. And that monastery beside there is Tripitaka. is the entire collection of Buddhist books. And one day, then he told all his disciples, saying that, look at that Buddhist scriptures, stored in that room. They are tour guide books. So he's saying something directly, saying as this, all these views are serving as a guide. Tour guide book is a guide. You are going to Thailand, you are going to Bangkok. Bangkok is a bustling city, nice places, developing so fast. You've never been there. You get a tour guide book. The tour guide book tells you hotels and everything. But if you stick to the tour guide book as truth, that is wrong. Therefore, it's serving as a guide only. That's why the right view is only a guide. That's why the Buddha said, he has viewed the world, but he does not hold any views. Why? Because if you hold any view, you are in contradiction with others. You will fight. You will fight with others. That's why Buddhism says that we should be guided by right view. That means we understand moralities. But on the other hand, you shall never stick to your views dogmatically. That is a very important idea in Buddhism. That's why Buddhism says the Dhamma is empty. To Buddhism, for happy life, there are these three foundations, three foundational principles to lead a moral life. Leading moral life so that we live happily. So this, we must say, is that Buddhism uses this as a rational way of thinking. First, that Buddhist idea first called karmavad. Karmavad means the doctrine of action. Recognize that our action have its consequences. In other words, Buddhism advocates moral life. In other words, moral life is very important, and recognition there is a moral life and there is moral consequences. Leading a moral life is meaningful. Why? Because it's contributing happiness. So meaningful moral life, it's recognized by Buddhism. Because this can be understood more better when we're looking into in India. During the time of the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, at that time, there are so many different kinds of teachers. Some teachers, in fact, reject moralities. Some teachers say that in this world, even if you do good deeds, there is no good consequences. Even if you're killing other human beings, you just split, all the elements. You have never killed anybody. So these kind of religions, they just, do not follow moral lives. This religion, of course, died out very soon. It is in this sense, Buddhism advocates that moral life is very important in comparison to those religions which say that there is no morality. So that is the first very important thing. The second principle here is that there is action, it's called kiriyavad, means that there is action, there is consequences. Action and consequences are related. If there is a good action, there's good consequences. If there is a bad action, it's bad consequences. So that is a very important idea. It's recognize our intention. Our intention itself have consequences. Good intention leading to good consequences, bad intention leading to bad consequences, and this itself put the moral responsibility to each individual. In other words, we as individuals, we must be responsible for our own action because our good actions contributing our happiness, our bad actions naturally leading us to miserable life. In other words, who is responsible for our life? Not outside the God. God is actually powerless. We are responsible for our life. That is emphasized in Buddhism. Emphasized in our own action, its intention, and this intention leading to its consequences. The third very important principle in this is emphasizing on human effort. In other words, leading a moral life needs us to put so much effort. We need to deliberately, consciously make an effort to lead a moral life. Without, all this effort, we can't lead a moral life. That's why it's a very important recognition of the human effort, emphasizing on human effort in leading a human moral life. In this moral life itself, of course, it's laid down the foundation for human happiness. Therefore, Buddhism, totally against the idea that everything happened by fate or chance. We are victim of fate. No, it's always causes and consequences. We must create the good causes if we want to live happily. Otherwise, we won't live happily if you don't do good causes. That's why here, then Buddhism recognizes so many very important things. For example, the 5 spiritual faculties. Here is faith, second effort. Very important. Mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. And Buddhism also speaking about the 7 factors of the enlightenment. And here also effort you can say is there. Mindfulness, investigation, effort. So effort emphasized in many places in Buddhist practices. That means that we as human beings, we must make effort in order to live a better life. Otherwise, we are the victim of chances. Otherwise, we will not be happy. So these are the 3 principles, very important, and emphasizing on human life, emphasizing on our effort. In other words, Buddhism justifies that we as human beings, we are responsible for our own life. It is only when we make effort, then we can live a better life. If we do not make effort, live to the chances, we are born to suffering. That's why we as human beings, because we experience happiness as well as sufferings, we know both. That's why we are working so hard towards happiness, because we understand it. Because we understand it, that's why we make the effort. Very important. That's why Buddhism is saying that there is such kind of necessity and there's such kind of desirability in human effort. First is necessary. In order to live a happy life, we are, it is necessary for us to make effort. Second, in order to live happily, it's desirable for us to do that. So that is a very important idea. It's totally different from Western religions and those believing a God, for example. Very different from this kind of religions. That's why here, Buddhism against these kind of 3 things in order to understand these kind of things. Buddhism criticizes that theistic determinism. That means everything is due to the fate of, this is spelling wrong, due to the fate of creator God. Buddhism criticizes that if everything is due to creator God, that means we human beings are powerless. We cannot change our life because already planned by God. So that means with the suffering, with the happiness, it's God's plan already. Second is that karmic determinism, and this is in India it's called Jainism. Jainism, in fact, holds this kind of idea, saying that everything is due to past karma. So this is also some of the Chinese Buddhist followers misunderstand Buddhist karma. They say that our life, everything is determined by the karma we have done in the previous lives. Buddhism, in fact, criticized this. That is a misunderstanding. And third is strict indeterminism. Everything happened due to fortuitous reasons. In other words, there's no reason. So Buddhism criticized all these 3 kinds of interpretations about human behavior and its consequences. Why Buddhism saying that? Here is that Buddhism say why these kind of things are wrong, because they denied one of the very important idea of Oh, I didn't write somewhere. That means human free will. We human beings, we have a free will. We can choose our life to do either good or bad. But all this determinism saying that we can't choose. Either God determined everything we can't choose, or past karma determined everything we can't choose, or the indeterminism saying that there is no choices because everything is not determined. That's why Buddhism criticized all these three earlier we said as there is no human freedom. Freedom of choices. We call the freedom of will. That's why, in other words, Buddhism recognizes human free will. And at this moment, for example, presently now, we are free to choose whether it's a good action or bad action. Because we are free to choose, that's why we are responsible for our own choices. If we have a bad choice, we will suffer. If we have a good choice, we will be happy. That's why it's here, Buddhism saying that we human beings, we need this human effort to make this to happen. But all this, earlier I said this determinism, they don't deny the human effort. Human effort is useless because you can't change God's will. God's already decided your life. How can you change? Past karma already decide your life. You cannot change. So Buddhism criticized all these three kind of things, and Buddhism saying that moral life depends on dependent arising. In other words, dependent arising means there is causes, there is such consequences. Yesterday we discussed this. Therefore, Buddhism says between our action and consequences, there is causal correlations between moral action and the consequences. There is a link. Therefore, the nature won't be changed. If the action, its nature is good, its consequences are also good. That is a very important idea. It is here, then Buddhism says that you need to have a right understanding and make the right choice. The right choice here, my teacher, Professor Kanodasa, said here is that Buddhism recognizes that we human beings, we have the free will. So this is, he said, the very evident fact that we feel free to act and exercise our initiatives in many situations is cited as examples for the possibility of the human effort. In other words, why Buddhism recognizes human effort in leading a moral life? It's because we are free, we feel free, we can make a choice. For example, now, and in this room, you can make a choice, stay here to continue to learn, or you can leave and go. This is, all are free. So we can make choices in all the life situations. By making these choices, it itself already exceeds our free will. Because we have this free will, because we have this initiative effort, that's why Buddhism is saying that you make this effort and you will face the consequences. In other words, it's because of this, what we call free will, that's why we human beings are taking the responsibility for our own actions. In other words, moral responsibilities, very important. If we do not have a free will, do not have the choices, why we are responsible? Since the gods planned for our life, the gods take responsibilities, we don't. The argument is that. That's why Buddhism emphasizes on human effort. That's why the text is saying that one day, a Brahmin come here asking the Buddha, and because the Brahmin learned other religions teaching, saying that there's no one's effort, no other Buddha's effort. That is one of the Indian religions teacher told him. And then come here saying that, he said, do you agree with these kind of ideas? Then the Buddha said, I have never heard about these kind of ideas. And in fact, you yourself make the effort coming here from your home and you will make the effort from here going back home, that is whose action? Who's making the effort? That means that person, he himself has a free choice, and he makes the effort to come, he makes effort to go. So Buddhism recognizes this personal effort is completely recognized because we have this making such kind of effort called initiative effort. That's why we make different kind of choices. For example, the Brahmin come here to say the Buddha, and he can make effort to say somebody else, other teachers as well, but he did not. So Buddhism recognizes human effort. That means we are free to choose. It's very important. It is this. Buddhism says this. We as human beings, we have the power. We have the power to change our life. Because we have the power to change our life, therefore, we can achieve happiness without any goals. Because according to the Buddhist teaching, in fact, God is hopeless in achieving our happiness. Why? Because happiness itself is subjective. It's our feeling. And our feeling and our emotion can only change by ourselves. We change our emotion. Outside anybody else cannot. Can influence, but cannot change it. It's only us. We can change our emotions. That's why Buddhism recognizes the individual powers. Our individual powers, particularly our mind, in fact, shape our way, our life. That's why Buddhism recognizes that you have the power to change your mind because you have the power to initiate any kind of thing to do. Make the right choices. That is a very important idea to Buddhism. So it's called free will in Western ideas. And when we understand this, then we come back to discussing the definition of karma in Buddhism. So we understand. So this is the Buddhist idea about the definition of the karma. Here it says, the Buddha said, I declare, O monks, that volition is karma. It's quite clearly. What is volition? Volition means our will, strong will. Having willed, one acts through body, speech, and thoughts. So here, volitional action, that is already a karma. In other words, karma is a psychological thing. Karma is mental. It's never physical, never verbal. And this action, intentional action, they can manifest through our verbal action, through our physical action, and also manifested in the mind. Therefore, karma is a psychological action. It's a volition. It's a mental. That is very important. Therefore, whether it's a good karma or bad karma depends on the nature of the intention. The nature of the intention is very important. If our nature of the intention is good, that is good karma. If the nature of the intention is bad, that is bad karma. That is exactly pointing to the roots of human goodness and human bad things. So the nature of our intentions. However, these intentions we call karma is conditioned by many things, in fact. That's why Buddhism, when it explains karma, goes on to explain all these conditions. First condition is the first is external stimuli. Second is conscious motivations. Third is factors is impacting unconscious motives. These are the three factors influence our mind, influence our intentions. The first is external stimulus. This refers to, for example, the five faculties plus the mind, the six faculties, and with the corresponding outside, things. That's why the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body, and together with the mind. This sense. When we see something very nice, then we have come up an intention, and that intention wanted to possess. Then this idea driving you to do things. So that stimulates us to make a karma. When you hear a nice sound or noises, for example, terrible noises, your feeling comes up, that is very bad. And then you have another intention, you want to avoid these kind of things. So all this, from the eyes, the ears, nose, tongue, the body, and also the mind, this influence our intentions. That's why the Buddhist practice starts with controlling and managing the 5 faculties. Because the 5 faculties giving all the information coming from outside, and this influence our intentions, remember. Because it influence our intention, therefore it triggers diverse different thoughts in our mind. Good thoughts, bad thoughts. For example, when you see somebody you have really, hatred, hate, and your anger arises when you see that person. But on the other hand, if you see somebody you really love, and different kind of thoughts comes up. That's why our mind are not standing alone. Our mind are influenced by so many different kind of things coming from the 5 faculties. All this information come, we started to do what? Discriminate these informations. We started to judging these informations. All this, coming to our mind. That's why Buddhism says these are the discriminations of all our interpretations. So this comes to a critical point because of this discrimination about these informations, and through our own interpretation, then we make a decision. When that decision is made, that is karma already. That's why the first is stimulated by external stimulus through the eyes, the ear, nose, tongue, the body. So that is the first stimuli. That's a direct stimuli, and this direct stimuli, make us to make decisions. It is from here come to the second, conscious motives. These are conscious motives because conscious means you intentionally, deliberately making such kind of decisions. And Buddhism always says these are the 3 kind of things. Usually say it's greed, hatred, and delusions. So here, greed sometimes also say cravings. In other words, these are the 3 roots of our consciousness. And if any kind of intention and decision made based on or motivated by these 3, that means bad decisions, bad karmas. So these decisions, 3, Buddhism always calls this as a root of human defined emotions. Or we can say roots of the human negative emotions. So we suffer from various different kind of emotions, and in fact these are the roots. In these roots, greed, hatred, these are the defined bad emotions, and the delusion in fact defined cognitive defilements. In other words, these 2 are more emotionally, delusion is more cognitive. Cognitive means we have a misunderstanding. If we raise our understanding about this greed and hatred, then we will have a better management about greed and hatred. That's why the entire Buddhist teaching is centered about delusion, in fact. Delusion does not mean that somebody is not wise, somebody is not learned. In fact, very wise person, learned people could be deluded on certain occasions. On certain occasions, he or she make bad decisions. This bad decision lead to people suffer. That because of the delusion. That's why, because of delusion, you rise hatred. Because of delusion, you rise greed. That's why delusion is the roots. Yesterday we already discussed a little bit between delusion and ignorance. Delusion is more temporary, while ignorance refers to something ontological, and ontological misunderstanding about moralities. Therefore, if we are guided by delusions, we will come to the wrong causes of actions. That's why Buddhism asks us to, learn from the Buddhist teaching, learn from, understanding about human life, so that we can tackle the delusions and make good decisions. Because these three are the roots of our emotions. Emotions, then we make bad decisions. Those others, these are the three. These are the three bad things. On the other hand, if greed, hatred, delusion are absent, and arising is some wholesome action. Wholesome action, usually we say here is generosity, compassion, and wisdom. Then that decision is good. So these are the two good and bad things. Third of this is non-unconscious motives. These motives is always latent in our mind, not manifested, but only when outside stimuli comes up, then it surfaces up. So here, usually in the Buddhist text, they listed these 7 sensual gratifications, self-perceptions, and here aggression and egocentric beliefs, obsession with doubt, and consent, ignorance. In other words, all these defilements still within us. But at the ordinary day, for example, today, everybody looks quite calm, everybody looks very nice, but that does not mean that these things are not there. These things are there, they are in a sleeping state. Because they are in a sleeping state, therefore, they do not influence our mind, they do not manifest into verbal action or physical action. But if we are, stimulated from these 5 faculties, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, any of this information come from outside, then these kind of things disturbed. For example, when somebody says something very bad words towards us, immediately that kind of anger being stimulated, you become angry. Therefore, although these are the latent ones, proclivities, but when there is a stimuli, they will come up. So these also serving as motives for performing karmas. In other words, when they comes up, at that moment we make a decision, it's influenced by these kind of things already. So this occurs as bad karmas. So these are the 3 categories of motives about our making a decision, good or bad. And these also demonstrate that our mind is highly adaptive to such an extent that if we continuously thinking something good, so the mind likes to develop from that directions. So this is, Buddhism says this, it's translated from Buddhist text. It says, the Buddha says, I just quoted the Chinese as well, and the Buddha says, whatever a person habitually reflects upon and ponders over in accordance with that will be his mental bent. So what does this mean? That means if we are habitually thinking something good and every day thinking these good things, the mind will delight in these good things. So the mind will naturally every day thinking these kind of things. If we think some for example, those suffer from depression, for example. The person who suffers from depression, one of the symbols is that person will always thinking about the bad things. I'm a failure in this job. I suffer from disease and things. So these kind of bad things. So when you come up, any kind of thing, you think every day about these things. Because you are thinking this, I'm a failure, I'm a bad person, then you become emotionally depressed. So the mind will continuously thinking that every day. In order to break this kind of vicious circle, you need to uplift your cognition. You need to understand these kind of things. When you understand how the mind works, then you immediately start from mindfulness, stop this kind of thinking, and thinking good things. So that is a very important thing to Buddhism. In fact, the neuroscience today told us exactly the same thing. Neuroscience says our mind are called neuroplasticity. In other words, our mind just like the plasticities, and they can bend. In other words, our mind, if we doing, repeatedly doing something, then our brain will change. The neuroscientists, in fact, discovered one thing when they gave, using the apes to have an experiment. And what they did is that if apes is using the left hand, usually, catch something, then the scientists, put the hole on the right hand every time. So they gave a food. The apes cannot use the left hand, they use the right hand to use. Now, after a few months, then the scientists discovered that in their brain, those parts managing the right hand developed so fast. And those parts in the mind managing the left hand started to shrink. That means our mind is always developing. When you use more of one hand, the mind managing this hand will develop very fast. That's why Buddhism says, when the mind is thinking about good things, and that part will develop, and you will like to think that continuously. If you think about bad things always, and the mind also delight in the bad things and continue. That's why it comes back here is that Buddhism recognizes this already by this saying. Whatever a person habitually reflects upon and ponders over, in accordance with that, upon will be his mental band. In the Chinese translation, makes it very clear. It's 随所思，随所念，心变若中。It means delight in that way of thinking. So that is a very important thing. It's exactly same as neuroscience discoveries about our mind. And when we understand these kind of things, that's why Buddhism, in its training, to train us always thinking about the good things, the positive things. Whenever there is a bad idea, bad thoughts comes up, you need to gradually remove it. That is a very important thing Buddhism started to do. And Buddhism says, these motives we discussed, these three aspects, they determine the nature of the karma. If the motives are bad, then the nature of the karma is bad. If the motives are good, then the nature of the karma is good. That's why Buddhism dives into the very roots of our emotions or intentions, how this intention comes up. So here are the Buddhist ideas. Unwholesome motives, they are leading to unwholesome karmas. So unwholesome motives, as we said, greed, aversion, delusion, these are the roots of moral evil. Because they are roots of the moral evil, so when these things become motives, then our decisions also is bad. So greed covers all different kind of degrees of the greed, from egocentric desire to grasping. Aversion also including all forms of different kind of hatred. Delusion, here is another expression of ignorance. Different from ignorance is that delusion is more temporary, while ignorance means something fundamental. You do not understand the fundamental ideas about human life. So these three things, when you look at it, all are psychological, all are mental. Since they are psychological, since they are mental, therefore the decision influenced by them as karma is also mental. Since they are unwholesome motivations, therefore the karma motivated by them is also defined unwholesome. Therefore, here we can say Buddhism traces to the roots of our intentions. And on the other hand, there are wholesome motives. Wholesome motives, they are wholesome karmas. What are the wholesome motives? Absence of the greed, absence of the aversion, absence of the delusion. This is very interesting, you know. Buddhism here never directly saying wisdom. Here, it's absence. Even the absence of the delusion already good. If we have more of wisdom, it's much more better. So that means any kind of motivation from here, absence of greed, absence of aversion, absence of the delusion, they are the positive or wholesome motives. In the Buddhist text, of course, instead of this, they use some positive manifestations. They called charity, liberality, renunciation, and goodwill, all these kind of things. In other words, absence of all the delusion, all the positive aspects of the mind will emerge. Now, what are the positive aspects or quality of the mind? That means amity, goodwill, gentleness, benevolence, loving kindness. These are the good aspects of the mind. So these good aspects of mind naturally will surface and manifest in our mind. So any kind of motivation based on this, they are the good karmas. So again, bad and good karmas, Buddhism tracing back to its roots, tracing back to its origin, not only discussing on the surface level. So these wholesome motives, it's very important. Buddhism wants us to cultivate. Not only, let there to exist, but we need to consciously, deliberately, we need to cultivate this kind of volitional intentions. And from these volitional intentions, gradually cultivation, then the delusion, other things gradually disappears. So here, I just quoted from, here is a German Buddhist monk. He is called Nyanaponika. He wrote several books on this Buddhist meditation and Buddhist idea about metta or loving kindness, discussed in so many places. He says that these are the very important, he says that it's the rational and intellectual aspect of the Buddhism. Buddhism is so rational. All these beliefs and actions, they not only told you to do this, but they also told you why you should do these kind of things. In other words, understanding. It's very important. It's from the understanding, then we have the motivation to do good. So it is from here, then go up to the level of liberating wisdom. So Nyanaponika did a lot of good things. Therefore here, Buddhism coming back to the roots of unwholesome or wholesome. All this going to its roots. Why Buddhism using these words? When we trace them back to the original Pali and Sanskrit, it's unwholesome means akusala. Wholesome means kusala. So this word itself is very important, because And when anything is kusala, that means the action done is not motivated by self-centered desire, but motivated by general compassion. When it's motivated by general compassion, that is truly, kusala karma. It becomes wholesome karma. Therefore, here is not using punya. Punya is another term, also means good karma, but punya means a good action done or motivated by self-centered desires. Although it's good, but there is a self. Therefore, it's not truly good. That's why Buddhism uses kusala, this idea. So kusala basically means skillful. You do something skillful without a self, purely for the goodness of all others. So that is a very important terminology in this explanation. It is from here leading us to a discussion about the pure mind and also called skillful mind. We can say the defined mind or the skillful, or you can say purified mind. In other words, Buddhism is saying that if the mind is obsessed by greed, hatred, and delusion, that means the mind is defined. Why? Because that mind is not pure. So that mind is also called the diseased mind, because that mind is having some kind of, emotional and negative aspects. That mind itself is also named as in bondage. So the mind is bound by all these kind of negative emotions. That's why the mind is not free. So these are the three things Buddhism uses. Defined mind, diseased mind, mind in bondage, all are the same in fact. In other words, it says great hatred, delusion are something, defines mind, bonds the mind to one place, the mind is not free. That's why the Buddhist idea is that gradually through kind of a practice, you turn this kind of a defined mind to a skillful mind. Remember, this akusala means unskilled, kusala means skill. That means this kusala, this word used, is not only a pure mind, a good mind, but using so many different kind of ways, skillful means, in order to achieve these kind of qualities. Therefore, the skillful mind means a good mind, pure mind. These are the two aspects. When the mind is pure, motivated by wisdom and skillful mind, then it can perform good deeds. When this mind started to make decisions, certainly it's a good decision. When the mind is defined and it make a decision, it make bad decisions. That's why Buddhism differentiate these two kinds of mind, the defined mind and the skillful mind. So entire Buddhist training, we can see, is coming back to train the mind. Train the mind so that from a defined mind to a skillful or pure mind through this kind of a process. Therefore, Buddhism is different from other religions, not going to outside, but to our own mind. And further going this is that Buddhism thinks that a skillful mind is happy mind. Why? Because it's a skillful mind, Buddhism uses several words. First is mental health. Why mental health? Because negative emotions are absent. All the positive emotions are there. The positive emotions, in fact, make our mind healthy. Then the second is mental purity. Why mental purity? Because defilements are gone. Great hatred are gone. That's why the mind is pure. And another word also used is mental felicity. Mental felicity basically is happy mind. Why the mind is happy? Of course, here is happiness, we must say, it means peaceful, not a kind of mind agitated, but peaceful. So these are the three words to describe this kind of skillful mind. Therefore, the skillful mind means a happy mind, happy mind. And in this kind of Buddhist analysis of the mind, you can see quite clearly is through a training, all the mental defilements are completely removed. After removing from the mind, so the mind becomes pure. So this becomes a basic Buddhist psychology. In fact, entirely psychological. Therefore, this happy mind, also a skillful, this is a positive mental disposition because the positive emotion is there. And this positive mental state leading to happiness. If the mind is defied, that is a negative mental disposition and leading to unhappiness. And Buddhist ethics from here is coming back. If the mind is pure, then the mind can do decision, and this good decision contributing to our all happiness. In fact, this idea itself, according to the Buddhist teaching, it's universal, in fact. Not limited to those who learn in Buddhism, practice in Buddhism, but all human beings. Why? Because the Buddhist analysis, you can say here, is going back to the roots in our mind. In our mind, our roots, we have great hatred, aversion, and delusions, and this does not have its boundaries. In other words, whether you are a Chinese, American, a British, or Indian, all are human beings. Since we are all human beings, we all have this. There's no divisions, no racial differences. That's why it's universal. Because great hatred, delusion is universal. On the other hand, pure mind also universal. Through a practice, when we achieve that pure mind, then we lead happiness. That's why the Buddhist idea about the ethics or moralities, they are universal teaching. Anybody, if you embark on this way of life, definitely it will lead you to happiness. Whether you believe in Buddhism or not is not a question. Because the entire Buddhist teaching is not based on faith, but based on rational thinking. That rational thinking, Buddhism says, leading to our happiness itself. Very important idea. It is to this, yesterday we have said this already, the Buddha is only a teacher, not a savior. It's very different from others. Others say, God will save you, you just sleep there, and you can go to heaven. Buddhism says, no, nobody doing that. You must make effort. Even the Buddha is only a teacher. In other words, it's a guide, tour guide. This tour guide guides you through the whole life. In this whole life, whether you will lead a good life or bad life, it depends on you. In other words, here again, from this we can see Buddhism highly emphasizes each and every one of us as human beings. We have the ability to achieve happiness, and it's only thing is that we need to make effort. Without making effort, we cannot do that. That's why even the Buddha, he just showed the way. Because he told us all these things, that's why we need to make effort. That's why the Buddhist text from the Dhammapada, it says that you yourselves ought to do what ought to be done. The Tathagatas, means the Buddhas, only shows the way quite clearly. In other words, the Buddha only teaches. That's why human effort, that's why when we go back to the beginning of this lecture, you still remember Buddhism emphasizing on human effort. Why? Because without our human effort, we can never achieve any happiness. And here again demonstrate exactly is that human effort is a necessity, is a must in achieving human happiness. Without this, we can't achieve human happiness. The Buddha, in a sense, we can say he is a moral authority. But he's a moral authority not because he can make us happy, but he has the knowledge. He has a knowledge about the subject of moralities. In other words, he has a full knowledge about how these moral principles govern our life. As I said earlier, yesterday's lectures is that the Buddha awakened to the universal law. After the awakening of the universal law, he came out to teach us. Let all of us to follow this universal law. If we do not follow this universal law, we naturally suffer because this universal law is equal to all. When you follow it, you will be happy. If you do not follow it, naturally you will meet with disasters. Exactly coming back to same here is about moralities. The Buddha has the authoritative knowledge about this moral law because he enlightened a point under the Bodhi tree about this moral law. And his job is to describe it, giving us a clear description. That's why Buddhism is more descriptive. For example, here's a bottle. Buddhism describes this, from all different kinds of theses and let you to understand clearly. And this is a bottle of water description. Therefore, Buddhism is not prescriptive. Ask, you must do this, do that. No. So that is very different from others. Therefore, in Buddhism, it's no moral commandment, no such kind of thing, but moral guidelines. Guidelines, that means it is better for you to do this, it is better for you to do that, but never say, you must do this, you must do that. Buddhism never do that. That's why moral guidelines are very important for us because if we understand moral guidelines, we naturally will follow it. When we follow these moral guidelines, then we will lead a good, happy life. If we don't follow these moral lies, and the Buddha told us, you will suffer. That's why it is in this sense, he is a moral authority because he understands this moral guideline clearly and give us clear descriptions. And karma, from the Buddhist aspect, is that although we discuss karma and thinking karma is important, however, karma is not the only factor influence human experience. In other words, there are so many different kind of factors influence our human happiness or human experience. Karma is one of them. So that is very important. We need to know. Karma responsible for everything. That is a misunderstanding. Karma is not responsible for everything in our life. So I will demonstrate a few of Buddhist texts and tell you that karma is just one of the most important factor affect our experience. According to Buddhist teaching, the entire universe is running on 5 principles. And in these 5 principles, some of them, they do not, out of our control. So the first principle governing the universe is that physical inorganic order. Physical inorganic order means seasons change. Of course, Singapore never changed, always summer. But if you go to China, if you go to the northern part of China, in the winter, it's terribly cold, -50. -50, what does that mean? To Singapore people like you, you do not understand what that means. To -50 means that when you go out of the room and stand on the street, you can only stand for 10 minutes. Otherwise, you just die. You must come back to room. That is so terrible. Those coming from the northern part of China, Heilongjiang, for example, they understand this. In the daytime, come to something like -20. -20 is terribly cold also. That's why my student, he's from Heilongjiang, and he told me that even in the daytime, -20 usually, when you go out, one layer of this, very, very thick winter clothes, he said, not enough. You need to have two. Inside you have a smaller one, outside you have another one. Then go out, you must come back within half hour. Otherwise, it's too cold. Then the cold will penetrate through this. So the seasons change from summer to winter. We can never change it. Seasons change also affect our feelings. Summer is very hot. Winter is too cold. Therefore, our experience also is affected by the seasons. So this sutta, called the Sevaka Sutta, gives us a clear description about this. Yes, it's so many things, altogether listed 8. Here it says, some feelings arises here, produced by the change of a climate. Directly, the Buddha said. So our experience, our feelings, also affected by the weather. That is not karma, because karma means our volitional action. Deliberately we make a decision, that is karma. But the weather change hot, we feel hot, not because we deliberately make this hot, no. But still affect our feelings. There are together 8. It's just showing that karma is only one of these things, affect our feelings. Then the second is physical organic order. Organic order here means you plant a mango tree seeds, gradually grow up a mango tree. It will never grow up an apple tree, for example. That is another order. And this order, also affect our life. We eat the food, for example. Third is moral order. That is karma we are discussing. The fourth one is the psychological order. That is our mind. The fifth one, order of the norm, Dhamma, here means the whole universe is running on a principle. That is the Buddha already discussed and discovered, and the Bodhi tree, and the whole universe running on what is called the dependent arising. That means kosher principles. So the kosher principle, in fact, is governing all other 4 orders. All other 4 orders must, running according to this Dhamma, the whole universal principles. Within these 5 orders, Buddhism says, all other 3 out of our human control. But these 2 we can control, karma and also psychological order. That's why Buddhism emphasizes these 2 and discuss it. Karma, it's intentional action. We can intentionally do good, at the same time, we can also intentionally do bad things, good and bad. And that's why through training, we can intentionally choose good. Fourth is the psychological order, our mind, we discussed already. Through training, if we always think about the positive things, good things, then our mind will naturally tend to think about good things. That's why Buddhism emphasizes these 2 and train us as human beings to develop so that we can achieve happiness. All others, out of our control. Because out of our control, no need us to discuss. For example, the weather. Nobody can change the weather. When we feel so hot in Singapore and you want to change, you can't change. What we can do is in this small room, air condition, other things. But the weather we can't change. That's why karma, as we said earlier, although it's important in explaining human life, but it's only one factor influence our experience. We will have a short break. After this, we can discuss this order of karma and mind. Have a short break.